The day Earth was scheduled for demolition, Ambassador Elijah Ross was arguing with a vending machine over the price of Earl Grey. It wanted 4 credits for a tea bag, an actual, soggy, dehydrated tea bag, and Elijah wasn't having it. Not because he couldn't afford it. No. It was the principle. "You overpriced glorified dishwasher," he muttered, jabbing the machine with increasing aggression. "I know you recognize me. I negotiated 3 peace treaties and stopped the Zarnek's Fellworm genocide, and you're really going to stiff me over a tea bag?" The machine beeped defiantly and spat out an empty cup. Then, the emergency lights flickered red, and his AI assistant spoke in a voice far too calm for what it was about to say. "Ambassador Ross, Priority Intercept, Council Protocol Alpha 7 initiated. Operation Reclamation authorized. Earth is marked for atmospheric disassembly in 72 hours. Elijah blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" That's how it started. No ominous thunder, no dark omens. Just a vending machine, an overpriced tea bag, and the sudden realization that the galaxy's most prestigious interstellar alliance had quietly scheduled humanity for annihilation. Elijah stood frozen, the empty cup still trembling in his hand, steam hissing from nowhere. "Atmospheric disassembly?" he repeated. The AI clarified with robotic cheer. "Total planetary conversion. Standard procedure for decommissioned species-class planets. Biomass reclamation, orbital strip mining, gravitational core siphoning. Shall I prepare your last will and testament?" By the time the shock wore off, he was already sprinting down the corridor of the Galactic Council station, shoes slapping against polished floors as dignitaries from across the galaxy milled about, blissfully unaware, or worse, complicit. If anyone noticed the slightly unhinged human yelling, "They're going to eat the planet," they chalked it up to normal Terran behavior. This was, after all, the same species that once invented nuclear weapons and roller coasters in the same century. Elijah darted into the restricted archive wing, breathless, heart hammering in his chest. He needed answers. Someone had to have known. Someone had to stop this. That's when he found Fluffernux, 15 limbs, covered in blue velvet fuzz, currently hyperventilating into a protein recycling bin. Fluffernux, as it turned out, had read the file. All of it. "The documents aren't even encrypted," Fluffernux wheezed, eyes twitching. "It was filed under long-term environmental optimization, Sol 3. That's Earth. They planned it centuries ago. Your species was labeled a Tier 6 chaos variable, marked for reclamation the moment it crossed quantum space thresholds. So we were never members," Elijah said, tone flat, jaw clenched. "Technically, you were provisional assets," Fluffernux corrected. "Pet project. A field study. They gave you access to galactic trade to watch how you'd behave. The entire Mars colony was a psychological observation post." He trembled. "I liked your CAD videos." I'm going to throw up," Elijah interrupted. "Get in line." The news was simple and devastating. The moment humanity became technologically independent, no longer reliant on Council infrastructure, they were deemed a threat. Not because they were evil. Not because they were warlike. But because they were unpredictable. Because they didn't fit. The Council couldn't control them, and that meant they had to go. Elijah paced the archive room, trying to think. Every wormhole from the station to the Sol system would be restricted. Comms would be cut. If he tried to contact Earth, they'd intercept the message and discredit it as propaganda. Worse, the Council wasn't doing this out of hatred, it was policy. Routine. Sanitary. No one had to feel bad if it was all filed correctly. "Fluff, we need to get off this station. We need to warn Earth." Elijah's voice was calm now. Focused. "Warn them? Warn how? We can't use Council comms. We can't exit via diplomatic lanes. If we're caught leaving unauthorized." "We're not using diplomatic lanes," Elijah said, grabbing a crate from under a storage panel and tossing open its lid. Inside were several plasma disruptor pistols, a tracking jammer, and a pack of peppermint gum. "We're stealing a ship." "You're a diplomat." I'm also from Detroit. Grab the disruptors. They moved quickly. Elijah rerouted his ID badge through a maintenance subroutine to avoid triggering exit protocols. Fluffernox jammed the station's tracking systems using old Terran malware he'd once downloaded for fun. The entire time, Elijah kept expecting someone to stop them. But no one did. The Council's mistake wasn't underestimating humanity's strength. It was assuming humans wouldn't notice. They made it as far as docking Bay 14 before the alarms started. Not the full station lockdown, just a subtle red flicker in the overhead lights. Subtle enough to make you second-guess yourself. Then came the noise, soft, echoing footsteps. Too even. Too quiet. Council assassins. Protocol enforcement units. They didn't need numbers. They needed precision. Elijah ducked behind a cargo crate and hissed. Okay. Now's the part where we shoot. I hate this part. Fluffernox squealed, firing blindly around the corner. His plasma bolt vaporized a snack dispenser. What did that snack machine ever do to you? It ate my lunch tokens in 3005. They made it to the transport, a diplomatic courier vessel shaped like a chrome sardine with booster jets. Elijah slapped the console. The engine sputtered, then roared. Warning! The ship's AI chirped. This vessel is unauthorized for launch. Violations of Override. Code, Humanity Last Chance 7. Code accepted. You maniacs. The ship burst from the station, ducking and weaving between traffic lanes, chased by two sleek black interceptors. The Council wasn't wasting time now. The chase lit up the void like a drunken fireworks show. Inside, Elijah gritted his teeth, hands on the controls, the screen flashing red every few seconds. We've got 72 hours, he muttered. Earth doesn't even know they're on the menu. And if we don't stop it. Fluffernox leaned against the wall, gasping. They're going to juice your planet like a fruit cup. Elijah stared into the stars. Then we'd better become the pulp in their teeth. Behind them, the Council station shrank into the distance, gleaming, silent, and rotting with secrets. Ahead, the vast, indifferent galaxy stretched on. And somewhere in it, Earth turned slowly under the light of its sun, blissfully unaware it was already dead. The stolen diplomatic vessel bucked like a furious mule as Elijah wrestled the controls, plasma blasts ripping through the dark of space behind them. Council interceptors stayed tight on their tail, their weapons clean and precise, meant to disable and detain, not destroy. It was worse that way. The Council didn't like mess. Mess meant attention. They wanted Elijah, and Fluffernox quietly disappeared, filed under transport accident, or diplomatic misunderstanding. Elijah had other plans. Fluffernox clung to the side panel, his 14 limbs tangled in a mess of wires and emergency snacks, desperately trying to reroute power to the secondary engines. This ship wasn't designed for evasive maneuvers. It's a glorified flying brochure. Then brochure us out of here. Elijah snapped, banking the ship hard to the right and diving into a dense shipping lane. Massive freighters and sluggish cargo haulers loomed all around them like lumbering giants. The Council fighters hesitated, unwilling to risk a diplomatic incident by shooting in civilian space. That was their weakness, bureaucratic cowardice wrapped in red tape. We've got maybe 60 seconds before they reroute traffic and resume pursuit, Elijah said, eyes scanning for a way out. I can jam their tracking for 3 minutes, maybe 4, but after that, we're glowing beacons. Fluffernox warned. We need a blind jump, or we'll never make it out of Council space. Blind jumps are for people who want to die creatively. Fluffernox looked at him with all 5 of his eye stalks. We're about to be vaporized. Dying creatively is the best-case scenario right now. With no better options, Elijah punched in a random jump vector pulled from an outdated tourist guide to the outer systems. A place called Galactic Drift, somewhere between a retirement colony for fungal philosophers and a gravity-warped mining outpost. As the ship spun up its FTL drive, the stars stretched and blurred, and the Council fighters vanished from view. Silence returned, thick and unnerving. Fluffernox slid to the floor in a heap of limbs. I think I dislocated something metaphysical. Elijah slumped into the pilot's chair. We bought time. That's all. They'll track us again. We need allies, someone who doesn't owe the Council a favor. The Independents, Fluffernux whispered. They left the Council decades ago. Said the system was corrupt. Started their own little rebellion. Not exactly friendly with humans, but they hate the Council more. Elijah nodded slowly. That's our next stop. But first, we need a crew. This ship's got the turning radius of a frozen cow. You have very specific metaphors. They set course for a halfway station called Junction Delta, a haven for outcasts, smugglers, and morally flexible mechanics. The docking bay was a rust-streaked nightmare of loose wires, leaking coolant, and loud shouting in 12 languages. As they exited the ship, a bolt fell from the ceiling and hit Elijah on the head. A welcome, he assumed. Within 20 minutes, they had attracted attention, not for being humans, but for asking around about ship upgrades, weapons, and illegal communication arrays. That kind of curiosity invited two kinds of responses: business proposals and ambushes. They got both. The ambush happened in a noodle bar. Elijah had just taken a bite of something vaguely shrimp-like when the lights flickered and 3 towering aliens with skin like oiled obsidian stepped into the room, weapons drawn. Ambassador Ross. One of them growled in a voice that sounded like it gargled gravel. You've been flagged for Council retrieval. Come quietly. Elijah dropped his chopsticks. Do I ever come quietly? Then the table exploded. Smoke, screaming, and a very loud laugh filled the air as a massive reptilian figure tackled one of the assailants. Scales shimmered red under the flickering lights, and her eyes glowed with amusement. I love when humans cause problems, she said, slamming the attacker into the floor hard enough to dent the tiles. Makes the week more interesting. Elijah coughed and ducked behind an overturned chair. And who the hell are you? Nava, she grinned, kicking the next attacker through a window. Mercenary, ship engineer, recreational knife thrower. Also, I like cats. Fluffernux peeked out from under the table. We're recruiting. Sold, Nava said without hesitation. Anything that pisses off the Council is my kind of job. They made it out of Junction Delta in one piece, mostly thanks to Nava's creative use of grenades and Fluffernux's sudden discovery that he could scream at a frequency that disrupted security drones. Back on the ship, Elijah pulled up a directory of nearby independent sectors. We head to Sigma Drift, he said. If anyone's going to believe us about the Council's betrayal, it'll be the paranoid exiles who already assumed the worst. Should we talk about the mysterious guy in the shadows who watched us escape? Fluffernux asked. What mysterious guy? Oh good, I was hoping that was a hallucination. The journey to Sigma Drift was long and tense. They made pit stops on small stations where the Council's influence had waned, gathering fuel, parts, and information. That's where they found the next crew member. His name was Carl. He was a human janitor. Elijah wasn't sure how it happened. 1 minute, he was arguing over docking fees, and the next, Carl had wandered onto the ship, mop in hand, asking where the bathrooms were. When they tried to remove him, he refused. I got nothing left on Delta Station, he said plainly. Council repoed my retirement fund and bombed my nephew's farm on Mars. Said it was a test strike. I may not know much about flying, but I know dirt, and y'all look neck-deep in it. So they let him stay. And then there was Cora, the pilot. 3 eyes, 6 arms, and a mathematical approach to flying that bordered on insanity. Cora was picked up on a gambling moon after winning a small moon in a poker game and promptly losing it again to taxes. She agreed to fly for them, provided they never asked her to do legal things with the ship. With a crew of 5.5, Fluffernux insisted his anxiety counted as a separate entity. They were finally ready to reach Sigma Drift. But just before their final jump, the ship's AI picked up a faint signal buried deep in the comm system. An encrypted message. Elijah decrypted it slowly, the color draining from his face with every word. It's a fake news protocol, he said. The Council's already spreading lies. They're telling everyone Earth declared war. That humans sabotage peace talks. They're justifying the attack. Fluffernox whimpered. They're rewriting history in real time. Elijah stared out the viewport. Then we're not just saving Earth. We're saving its name. Sigma Drift was less a space station and more a floating argument held together by duct tape, gravity errors, and bribes. It spun slowly above a fractured moon, its hull patched with mismatched alloys from at least 17 different species, and its security system run by what appeared to be a highly caffeinated ferret in a helmet. The place stank of oil, ozone, and bad decisions, which, according to the welcome sign, was part of the brand. Elijah had never seen anything so chaotic, and it made him instantly homesick. The docking sequence alone took an hour, mostly because the station demanded a randomized entry toll, which included an insult contest, a fruit basket, and answering the question, "What is the purpose of existence?" Cora handled the insult contest with enthusiasm, Nava stole the fruit basket from a confused merchant, and Carl answered the philosophical question by muttering. Mostly mopping, occasionally yelling, which seemed to satisfy the docking AI. Once docked, the crew stepped into the heart of galactic dysfunction. The main promenade of Sigma Drift was a kaleidoscope of cultures smashed together under flickering neon signs and badly translated slogans. Elijah watched a four-legged diplomat from the Gelathin cluster haggle over jet fuel with a smuggler wearing a tutu and a tattoo that read, "Regret is a fuel additive." Across the walkway, a hologram advertised something called Spaghetti Night at a place that didn't appear to serve food, and Fluffernox immediately began vibrating with the stress of so many variables. "This place makes me itchy," he said. "That's your anxiety," Elijah replied. "Or the air filters." They had come to meet the Independents, those species that had left the Council when the first cracks began to show. According to Fluffernox, a few of them were rumored to still be organizing in the shadows, building ships, and waiting for the day when they could prove the Council was rotten. That day had apparently arrived. The problem was that no one knew who led them, how to find them, or if they were still alive. So Elijah did what he always did when information was scarce and danger was high. He went to the loudest bar and started a fight. The Rusted Fawn was half saloon, half interstellar garbage fire. The ceiling leaked plasma condensation, the bartender was an actual sentient barrel, and a band played music that sounded like jazz being murdered by robots. Elijah ordered a drink that fizzed, blinked, and tried to bite him. Then he stood on a table and yelled, "The Galactic Council is murdering my planet! Anyone else want to punch a tyrant?" A brief silence followed. Then someone threw a chair. The next few minutes were a blur of fists, claws, screaming, and at least one musical instrument used as a weapon. Elijah found himself dodging a creature made entirely of fire while Fluffernox shrieked in the background and Nava had but a six-armed mercenary through the bar counter. Carl threw his mop like a javelin and took down a lizard with a jetpack. Somewhere during the chaos, a heavily armored figure watched from the shadows, eyes glowing faintly red. Eventually, the brawl slowed, and the bartender, who had not moved from his position, sighed and pressed a button under the counter. The floor under Elijah and his team dropped like a trapdoor into an abyss, and they landed in a surprisingly clean underground chamber with padded walls and a conference table. "Well," said a voice, smooth and cold. "That was the loudest request for a meeting we've ever received." Standing across the room was a slender alien in a matte black cloak, face hidden by a mask shaped like a crescent moon. Around them stood a few others, humanoid, insectoid, and a floating jellyfish wearing glasses. This was the leadership of the Independents. Survivors, rebels, and idealists too stubborn to die or too dangerous to trust. "You're Elijah Ross," the masked one said. "Human ambassador. Diplomatic wildcard. Former tea addict." "I still like tea," Elijah replied, brushing dirt off his jacket. "I just hate betrayal more." They didn't laugh, but something about the room shifted. Elijah took a step forward. "The Council has activated a protocol called Operation Reclamation. They plan to strip Earth clean. Atmosphere, oceans, the whole thing. All filed under planetary conversion. We've heard rumors, the masked leader replied. But no proof. Fluffernuck stepped up, shaking slightly, and activated a holopad. It projected a series of documents, decrypted files, surveillance footage, and a growing list of Council black sites. The air in the room grew heavier. This isn't extermination, Fluffernuck said. It's policy. They do this to any species that becomes independent too fast. We were just the first to live long enough to notice. There was silence. Then one of the independents spoke, a hunched insectoid with a buzzing voice. If this is true, then the Council is not a government. It's a harvesting system. The masked leader nodded slowly. And you want us to help you stop it? No, Elijah said. I want you to help us expose it. Make them run from the truth before they even try to fire a weapon. But if they do shoot first, then yeah, I'll need some weapons. The leader walked over to the projection, studying the data in silence. Then they touched the holopad gently and said, I'll give you what you need. A broadcast beacon. Something that can override Council media signals and force every major channel to show the truth. Wait, Carl said from the back. That's a thing? The leader gave him a nod. You'd be surprised how many paranoid tech developers end up working for us. Or hiding in bars. As they finalized the plans, a quiet chime echoed from the ship's comm channel. Fluffernuck tapped it, frowned, then tapped it again. His limbs began to twitch. Elijah, he said softly. We've been compromised. Someone broadcast Earth's coordinates. What? Elijah snapped. Who? They turned as one to Nava, who stood near the door, her tail stiff, face unreadable. She didn't speak, didn't move. Then, slowly, she dropped a tiny device from her pocket. It hit the ground with a soft ping. My hatchlings, she whispered. They said they'd kill them if I didn't cooperate. Everyone froze. I didn't give them much, she said. Just tracking pings. Enough to follow, not enough to strike. I was going to stop. Cora raised a weapon. Elijah stepped in front of it. We don't kill our own, he said. Especially not when they've got a reason to fight back now. Fluffernuck deactivated the weapon systems. Nava looked at him, eyes glassy. You still trust me? Elijah exhaled. No. But we're family now. And humans are very bad at letting family go. The beacon would be ready in hours. The plan was dangerous, reckless, and possibly suicidal. But for the first time, the galaxy would hear the truth. Not filtered through Council censors. Not softened by diplomacy. Just raw, unfiltered humanity, and a team of broken misfits, ready to burn the sky if it meant saving their home. The broadcast beacon was a relic from the early days of galactic colonization, buried under layers of encryption and literal dust, found in a disused control tower behind the Sigma Drift Promenade. It looked like someone had fused a lighthouse with a cathedral and wrapped it in antennae. Cora declared it, possibly haunted, and then immediately volunteered to rewire it. While she worked, Elijah paced the floor of the ship, trying to string together words powerful enough to shift an entire galaxy's perception. Words that would punch through propaganda and fear and complacency, and reach species who had been told humans were dangerous, violent, ungrateful creatures. He knew the Council's strategy now: destroy Earth and make it look like Earth had brought it on themselves. Call it a civil response to an insurrection. Justify the erasure of a planet with enough technical jargon that no one would blink. It had worked before. It wouldn't work again. He looked out the viewport, watching the starfield drift by. Somewhere, on that beautiful blue marble, people were eating breakfast, fighting over parking spots, laughing at terrible sitcoms, and scrolling past breaking news they wouldn't believe until it was too late. He thought of the girl in Nairobi building water purifiers in her garage. The kid in Brazil trying to break the planetary record in a zero-G drone race. The elderly couple in Toronto who still wrote letters instead of emails. They deserved more than silence and vaporization. Elijah wasn't about to let their lives be footnotes in someone else's archive. When the beacon lit up for testing, The ship vibrated like it had been slapped by a god. Fluffernox screamed and dove under a console while Carl calmly finished his sandwich and remarked, "That's probably not how normal antennas work." Nava didn't speak. She stood apart, watching the beacon from the edge of the platform with a stillness that unnerved even the jellyfish diplomat who had come to assist. She hadn't said much since revealing her betrayal. But she hadn't left either. Elijah gathered the crew inside the central broadcast chamber. The console was ancient, the buttons unlabeled, but Tkora assured him that one of them definitely started a full-spectrum override signal. Possibly also an explosion. Elijah took a deep breath, centered himself, and activated the camera. The red light blinked to life. Across thousands of ships, stations, and planets, screens flickered. Scheduled entertainment, emergency announcements, and advertising feeds were all hijacked. A human face filled them all, unfiltered, unedited, and unsanctioned. Elijah Ross looked directly into the lens and spoke. "This is Ambassador Elijah Ross of Earth. If you're seeing this, then something has already gone wrong. I want to talk to you, not as a diplomat, not as a representative of a species, but as a living being who knows what it means to be lied to." He paused, letting the words settle in billions of minds. "The Galactic Council is planning the destruction of Earth. Not because we broke the rules, not because we threatened anyone, but because we no longer needed them. Because we learned too fast, grew too far, and stopped being convenient. We were never invited into the Council to be equals. We were studied. Observed. And when they were done, they scheduled our end like a maintenance update." People stopped what they were doing. In the core worlds, Council administrators froze in horror as alerts lit up their control rooms. On fringe colonies, old rebels leaned forward. On mining ships, freighters, educational hubs, refugee stations, everyone watched. "But here's the truth," Elijah continued. "We figured it out. And we're not the first. You just never heard from the others because they never got the chance to speak. So I'm speaking for them. I'm speaking for every species, every colony, every voice that's been silenced in the name of galactic peace. You deserve better. We all do." Behind him, Fluffernox activated the visual records, images of the Council files, maps, planetary protocols, and video logs of Council meetings that had been thought erased. Data that couldn't be denied. Evidence, undeniable and damning. "If you're afraid," Elijah said, "you should be. Not of humans. Of what the Council does when no one's watching. We're messy, sure. Unpredictable, stubborn, too loud, and too curious. But we build things. We love things. And we don't run. Not from bullies, not from tyrants, not from gods." He ended the broadcast there. Not with a rallying cry, not with a promise of victory, but with raw, unpolished honesty. And then the galaxy trembled. The response was immediate and chaotic. Council members tried to suppress the signal, but it was too late. Ships from neutral factions began changing course. Entire outposts went silent, refusing to respond to Council commands. Protests erupted on stations that had never seen resistance in generations. Species who'd been too afraid to speak now had a voice, and it looked like a tea-drinking Terran with bags under his eyes and a broken suit jacket. But not everyone joined the chorus. The Council moved quickly. Faster than expected. Within hours, a fleet had launched from their core systems. Not a show of force. A declaration of annihilation. They weren't going to let Earth become a martyr. They were going to make it disappear. The ship's AI announced the incoming fleet. It had intercepted encoded military chatter that made even Tkora go pale. 20 warships. Dreadnoughts. Atmospheric disassemblers. Automated cleanup drones. A planet-clearing task force. Elijah sat down in silence for a long moment. Then he stood. "They're going to Earth now. We either beat them there or die trying." Nava stepped forward, eyes steady. "I know back routes through the system. Hidden gates. I used them before. We can intercept the fleet." "You sure they're not traps?" Fluffernox asked. She looked at him. "I'm not sure of anything anymore. But I know how to hurt them back. Carl rolled his shoulders. Guess we're doing this, then. I didn't mop spaceports for 20 years to go out quietly. As the crew buckled in and the ship roared to life, a final encrypted transmission reached them from Earth. It was short, blurry, but clear enough to make them all sit up straighter. A woman in a uniform stood before a bank of holograms. We received your warning, she said. Defense satellites are online. Human fleet is mobilizing. We're not running. Elijah smiled slowly. That's my planet. The ship plunged into a gravitational corridor, the stars twisting into streaks. The Independents were moving too. Their ships launched from secret hangars and asteroid bunkers, loaded with weapons and old grudges. They were joining the fight not just for Earth, but for a galaxy that had forgotten what resistance looked like. As Sigma Drift fell behind, the crew prepared for the battle ahead. The Council wasn't just fighting humans now. They were fighting everyone they thought was beneath them. And for the first time in 1,000 years, those voices weren't silent anymore. The Council fleet arrived at Earth expecting silence. What they found instead was defiance carved into orbit. Hundreds of cloaked defense satellites blinked to life as soon as the first dreadnought crossed Neptune's shadow, revealing a network so intricately hidden it had fooled every surveillance protocol the galaxy had ever devised. Each satellite bore a designation not of military logic, but of human stubbornness, names like Hold the Line, Try Me, and Karen's Revenge. The lead dreadnought, sleek and arrogant in its design, opened a channel to issue a final demand. It never finished the sentence. A focused particle beam from Earth's orbit shattered its midsection in a single pulse. That was when the real battle began. Elijah's ship emerged from the back end of a wormhole just as the war erupted. The sky over Earth was on fire. Blue-white energy trails stitched the stars while magnetic disruptors flared against ion shields. Council carriers deployed drone swarms in the millions, insect-like and silent, meant to overwhelm by sheer volume. But Earth was ready. For years, quietly and methodically, it had prepared for the day its invitation to the stars would become a sentence. They had been warned. First in whispers, then through back channels, and finally by their own paranoia. Humanity had seen the cracks forming and built not for conquest, but for survival. The planetary shield grid flared a brilliant orange as the first wave of kinetic strikes hit. Each was absorbed, redirected, or returned with interest. Elijah watched from the cockpit as one of the Independence cruisers broke formation and slammed headfirst into a Council destroyer, triggering a chain reaction that spun debris across the void like confetti from a collapsing empire. Cora was shouting about trajectory angles while simultaneously arguing with the ship's AI, which had decided this was the perfect moment to reboot for updates. Carl was calmly manning a turret, chewing gum and muttering about mop handles. Nava, silent and coiled, waited by the breech door, ready to board. The plan was reckless. Fly directly into the chaos, breach one of the Council's flagship command ships, and extract proof that Operation Reclamation was an ongoing galactic policy, not a one-time order. With that, the Council wouldn't just lose a battle, they'd lose legitimacy. Elijah knew the war wouldn't end with this, but it could begin with it. The Independents fought with savage precision, flanking in ways no standard fleet could anticipate. Species who had never shared a meal were now coordinating attacks like lifelong allies. Ships with mismatched parts, jury-rigged shields, and stolen weapons fought circles around the pristine Council war machines. Unity and defiance had a language of its own. They reached the flagship's perimeter just as a secondary explosion tore through its docking ring. Elijah directed the ship into the rupture, bracing for impact. The airlock barely held. The team flooded into the corridor beyond, weapons drawn. Council security was already on high alert, armored guards pouring in from every corridor, but they hadn't accounted for the way humans and their allies fought, with desperation, unpredictability, and absolutely no regard for protocol. Nava led the charge, slicing through defenses with brutal efficiency. Fluffernox launched what he called a diplomatic sonic negotiation that left the guards disoriented and vaguely embarrassed. Elijah pushed toward the central core. He knew what he was looking for, a black box, not metaphorical, but actual. It held the ship's real logs, the unfiltered communication with High Command, the orders, the planning phases, the projected timeline for planetary dismantling operations not just for Earth, but for dozens of other targeted systems. The room was locked, sealed with bio-coded encryption. Fluffernox hacked it in 12 seconds while singing an old Terran sea shanty he had learned from an educational cartoon. Inside the core, Elijah found the data cube, glowing faintly, like it knew it had betrayed someone. He held it up, breathing hard. This is it. This ends their story. But as they turned to leave, the corridor behind them filled with plasma fire. The Council had released its last line of defense, phase units, artificial beings bred for assassination and suppressive combat. Faster than organics, programmed to obey, stripped of empathy. One raised its arm to fire. Nava stepped in front of Elijah. The blast caught her square in the chest. She staggered but didn't fall. Her eyes met Elijah's, and she said, with dry amusement, "You still trust me?" He caught her before she collapsed and whispered, "I never stopped." Carl fired a grenade round that turned the phase unit into a smear across the corridor wall. They dragged Nava out, blood mixing with engine smoke and alarm strobes. The ship was waiting, barely holding position as more enemy fighters swarmed the area. Cora performed an emergency docking that involved crashing into the ship at just the right angle to bounce off a bulkhead and settle into the launch tunnel. No one knew if it was intentional. Everyone knew not to ask. They escaped the flagship just as the Independent Fleet focused fire on it, turning the sky into a supernova ballet of defiance and calculated revenge. The data cube pulsed in Elijah's hands like it knew it had finally been seen. Back on Earth, the transmission was ready. From a secure relay station hidden deep beneath the Arctic Circle, Elijah uploaded the files. Every word, every file, every voice that had planned the end of Earth and the quiet erasure of hundreds of civilizations now danced across screens, echoing through diplomatic halls, broadcasting into homes where children had been told the Council was peace made manifest. What they saw now was policy turned predation. The Council didn't collapse in a single day. But the myth of its benevolence shattered instantly. Protests erupted across its territory. Former allies defected. Fleets turned inward, confused and divided. High Command tried to declare the transmission fake, but too many had already verified it. It wasn't just data. It was truth, and truth had weight. Elijah stood in Geneva's recovered council chamber 3 days later, now held by Earth and its allies. He wore the same rumpled jacket, patched at the sleeve, stained with something that might have been grease or Fluffernux's stress pheromones. Before him stood the tribunal, a hastily formed alliance of planetary leaders who had agreed on one thing: someone had to answer for what was done. Fluffernux served as Elijah's legal advisor, mostly because he'd read every council law book out of spite. The trial was short. The evidence overwhelming. No one from the council's leadership appeared in person. Most were either in hiding or arrested by their own security forces trying to avoid being dragged down with the system. Earth declined to rejoin any galactic government. Instead, it formed a coalition, free coalition of independent worlds, built not on hierarchy, but on mutual defense, open tech sharing, and the radical belief that no species deserved to be erased for becoming inconvenient.